Welcome back, everybody, for the second part of this presentation. The sinking of the Lusitania, and then followed by the breaking of the pledge, the Sussex Pledge, and the sinking of the Sussex, killing 50 people, was really the last straw for the United States. The Germans' use of unrestricted submarine warfare ultimately is going to cause them to join the Allies in fighting World War I. And this is when you'll begin to see posters such as the one on this picture here, Uncle Sam. It's a pretty famous poster, um, uh, really telling young men to go to the nearest recruiting station and join the United States Army. Um, so the United States declares war on April 6, 1917. Against Germany because of the Sussex Pledge and the U-boats sinking of unarmed vessels. In all, they sink approximately 5,000. So that's a tremendous amount of ships to be sunk, and they weren't all merchant ships, or they weren't all military ships. Many of them were passenger ships. 200 American ships were sunk during this time as well. And again, more posters are made, such as this. Let's keep the glow and old glory, and the free and freedom too. And so you have all of our branches of military, or at that time what existed, the Army and the Navy, and the Marines that were present in the service. The Selective Service Act is issued during this time, which was a draft of young men for service. Americans were very enthusiastic to join for their, either to volunteer or to be drafted in the military. And at this time, 24 million men register for the draft. And of those 24 million men, 3 million are drafted into service. And essentially, what happens when you fill out a selective service card um, at the U.S. Post Office, the president of the United States would pick a number. It would be kind of like if you've ever gone to like a bingo game in a big bingo hall, and they have this thing that rolls, that you kind of turn this handle, and it rolls the numbers that the bingo caller is going to pick out. And that's really what they used at this time as well. And so you would have all these various numbers, or range of numbers, in this big barrel that turns around, and the president, literally the president of the United States, would reach in and pick out a number. And if your selective service card had that number on it, you were drafted into service for the duration of the war. Some more posters that are created at this time. Don't wait for the draft. Volunteer now. Don't wait for your number to be called. Another one asking on the left-hand side, is your home worth fighting for? It will be too late to fight when the enemy is at your door, so join today. And that really was the fear among many Americans, is that, we have German U-boats off the coast of off the Atlantic coast, and who's to say they aren't going to storm our shores and take over our cities. And so that way, and make this a German-speaking country as opposed to an English-speaking country. So that really was a legitimate fear, or a fear that many had during that time. That was just pronounced even more so by the use of propaganda. This is a picture of my grandfather's registration card for the Selective Service. His name is down here, Joseph John Stadler. He's a German. His father was a first generation immigrant. So my grandfather was born in the United States, but his dad was born in Germany. And essentially, we're fighting against family members back in Germany. This is a picture of my grandfather right here, and here on the left in his World War I uniform. And he's also in this picture. I believe he is, I'm not sure which one he is in that picture. But at any rate, my great grandfather, uh, was called up for service in World War One. Just more pictures, reminders, propaganda posters that help to kind of show how how bad Germans were viewed at that time. They're viewed as really as animals. In this particular poster, they're viewed as kind of like King Kong of that day and age. And if you see on this bat here, or what a club that this German brute is carrying, it says culture, Kultur, and essentially meaning that if Germany takes over the United States or invades the United States, that they will spread their culture and will no longer be speaking English. It's just some more propaganda posters during this day and age. The Second Official United States War Picture, America's Answer, Division of Films Committee on Public Information. We'll have people literally that will go around the country called Minutemen that will stand on street corners, and their job that they were given to do was to on the various street corners around the country that they go to, they have 4 minutes to give a persuasive speech about why why joining the service is patriotic and going to war with Germany is patriotic. But they were called the 4-Minute Men. And again, so propaganda was not only necessary, or was not only used by way of posters, but also by way of speeches that were literally given across the country at this time. Again, just some more. I think I showed that one earlier. During this time, President Wilson passed something called the Espionage and Sedition Act in 1917. He created this act to prevent people from speaking against the war. So if you were critical of the war, if you were an anti-war protester, and there was huge anti-war protest movements during World War One, you were subject to being thrown in jail. And this created huge constitutional issues. The government was sued. Many people were thrown in jail. And a minimum of 10,000, if not more, people were thrown in jail during this time. And the idea, once this case reached the Supreme Court, was that during wartime, such as they were in wartime, your constitutional rights are not guaranteed if there is a clear and present danger. And at this time, it was interpreted that Germany invading the United States presented a clear and present danger. So if you were an anti-war protester, or if you were standing outside a recruiting station protesting the war and saying bad things about the president, or telling young men that are in line to volunteer that they're essentially crazy for doing so, that person could find themselves in prison. But it wasn't just war protesters that were thrown in prison, also German and Italian immigrants, because we will also be at war with Italy in World War One. And my great-grandfather, the father of my grandfather that I showed you that enlisted in, or that was drafted into World War One, his dad was thrown in jail during World War One because, as a German immigrant, he was not in favor of the war and refused to salute the American flag. And as such, he found himself in prison for the duration of World War One. Segregation, of course, lingers during this time. It hasn't disappeared, and 300,000 African Americans volunteered to serve in segregated American units during World War One. Most never saw combat, however. Many, though, also served or volunteered in the French military and served in integrated units, which meant that they fought side by side by white French soldiers, but in America they were still segregated. And this is just a picture of the 369th Infantry Regiment that served during World War I, black veterans trying to make the world safe for democracy. The home front during the war, a lot of stuff going on at home. Women will volunteer. Anybody that's not serving in the war will volunteer. Everybody is doing their part, and so this was really a home. This was a united effort, not just by soldiers but by people at home. There's things that people can do. You can buy Liberty bonds. Then the United States government needed to raise money, so you could buy a bond, a Liberty bond, for say let's pretend it's $25. And in 20 years, that Liberty bond might have doubled in value or tripled in value or whatever, and you can cash it in and get your money back plus a nice profit. So Liberty bonds are sold. They're also rationing food supply. All the food that are made in factories and that people grow in their gardens, everything is going toward the war effort. And so on certain days of the week, you could only you had to use wheat. Instead of using wheat, you needed to eat more corn. Another one was meat. Use more fish and beans. All the meat should go overseas. Fats, just use enough for what you need. Sugar, use syrup instead of granulated sugar. And everything was intended to help save help save food and ration food that should go to our soldiers that are fighting in Europe. Also plant victory gardens. Plant gardens not only for yourself, but your extra food should go to soldiers fighting overseas. So plant victory gardens. All right, so the Treaty of Versailles does end World War I. And on November 11th, 1918, armistice stops the war, which means a ceasefire. And on the 11th day of the 11th month of the year at exactly 11 a.m., armistice was signed, and President Wilson's main goal during this armistice treaty with Germany was, and all the allies, in fact, the Treaty of Versailles, was that Germany must pay reparations or pay for the entire war. Germany must accept guilt for the war, even though they were the ones, even though they did not actually start the war. It started in Serbia, but they did use unrestricted submarine warfare that killed a lot of innocent people, and that Germany had to demilitarize or essentially cut back their military to just a skeleton military, just enough to defend itself, and that was it. Not enough to have huge aggressive armies that are going to invade countries. And Germany must give Bavaria to France. The problem is that you have a lot of young Germans that are incredibly angry at this Treaty of Versailles and Germany having to accept defeat. After all, this is one of the greatest armies in the entire world. And there's a young soldier, a young private that was injured during World War I, and he's sitting in the hospital listening on the radio or reading in the newspaper the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and from that moment on, he essentially is committed to revenge and to strike back. And that young private was Adolf Hitler, who had from his hospital bed had really committed himself, as I said, to take revenge out on those that punished Germany for World War I. And I should say, about 10 years ago, when I was teaching high school at Rudder High School, Germany had finally made, nearly 100 years after the end of World War I, Germany had finally made its final payment that it owed the Allied nations for starting World War I. So it took almost a century to pay off that war debt. Granted, there were periods of time where they weren't paying the debt because the war, especially when Adolf Hitler became president of Germany, he used war reparations to build up the German military as opposed to actually paying off the war debt to the Allied nations. All right, so this concludes our World War I presentation. If you have any questions, by all means, don't